Hello, everyone, to our Redeemer Lutheran Church Bible study on the book of Hosea. I'm Pastor Eric Kleinschmidt from Redeemer Lutheran Church in Highland, Indiana, and this is session number 1 of our study of the Old Testament minor prophet book of Hosea. Okay, so today we're going to run through a little bit of historical background, kind of set the scene for what Hosea is writing about, or at least who he's writing to and why, and then we'll get through Hosea chapter 1. If you haven't been with us before, you can check out other Bible studies, our playlists, which are on our YouTube channel. If you subscribe to that, you'll be notified right when a new one gets posted. I try to do one every week, but things kind of happen. So I meant to start this last week, but had a couple funerals here at church, and so those take precedent over this, and they were on Wednesdays, so it ate up that time. Anyway, you can always follow along at home or on the screen. We're using the English Standard Version translation of the scriptures. I find it to be a good balance between biblical faithfulness to the original languages, Hebrew and Greek, but also readability, because Hebrew and Greek, they don't follow the same sentence structure as English, and so it can be kind of confusing to have a very, very literal translation of the Bible. Whereas if you make it too much like English, you lose some of the nuance and the emphasis that was originally in the Hebrew and Greek. So the ESV has a good balance of all of that, and I find it to be a faithful translation of the scriptures 99.9% of the time. There's a few times where I'll point out where I wish they had translated a word a little bit differently, because I think it lends itself to the meaning, but that's not my area of expertise. But this is a good version. Use the version that you have at hand. Just realize that if you're using something else, the words may not always match up. Sometimes the verses may not match up either. But for the most part, you'll be able to follow along just fine with whatever you have at home, or you're welcome to just listen or watch on the screen as I will read what's there and then offer some commentary. Let's get into it, okay? Okay, Hosea is the first book of the minor prophets. Now, the books of the Old Testament do not go in chronological order. That's important to know and to remember. Certainly, Genesis starts off in chronological order, and it follows the history of the Exodus, and the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of Moses, give us a historical record. But then you kind of move from that to wisdom literature of Psalms and Proverbs, and the historical records of Kings and Chronicles. Then you have the major prophets and then the minor prophets. They're not laid out chronologically. So you can't just read the Old Testament from Genesis all the way until you get to the New Testament and have a full, timeline. There are books of the Bible translations of the Bible where they do arrange the Old Testament chronologically. I think you can purchase those, but historically, the books have been arranged and categorized by type in the Old Testament, not in chronological order. So the same thing is going to kind of happen here within the book of Hosea, as Hosea is not a cohesive story from chapter 1 all through the book. They are oracles, they are visions, they are prophetic utterances given to Hosea to speak to God's people, both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, but primarily the northern kingdom. We're going to talk about that in a second. As such, as they come to Hosea and he does them, then they're kind of self-contained. And so it's not a story that moves from one chapter to the next. There's almost, I don't want to say standalone, but they're kind of self-contained. So just realize that there are different types of writings in the Old Testament, that the Old Testament is not presented chronologically, and that in the book of Hosea, we're going to find these oracles dealt with sort of one at a time. That'll set you up well as we talk about this. So let's look at this first verse. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea. Okay, well, who is Hosea? Well, he's the son of Beeri, whoever that is, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, that'd be southern kingdom, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, that's northern kingdom. The southern kingdoms, or the southern kings of the kings of the southern kingdom, how about we put it that way, are listed there, and some of them were good and some of them were not. Same thing with the northern kingdoms, although the northern kings, some of the kings in the northern kingdom were good. Some of them did good things, but also had some problems. Jeroboam is one of those, okay? And this is Jeroboam the second. That's important to know too, because Jeroboam the first was different. And although Jeroboam the first was pretty much a king who oversaw a peaceful time and sort of a renaissance in Israel, he didn't totally eliminate Baal worship or the worship of the golden calves, as we'll look at here in a bit. So he's not exactly 100% faithful. He did a lot of good things, but he is kind of critiqued for that one big problem. Hosea, we assume and can surmise that he is from the northern kingdom, and so he is going to have much more information and much more dealings with Jeroboam than he is with the kings of the southern kingdom. However, God's word is meant for all of them. If you remember your history, the northern kingdom will last a little bit, or no, the southern kingdom, the southern kingdom of Judah lasts longer than the northern kingdom. It holds out against the invaders. The northern kingdom falls to the Assyrians. The southern kingdom eventually falls to Babylon, if I remember correctly. We're going to find some history here, and I think it's probably a good time to talk about that. So the northern and southern kingdoms, if you don't remember, shortly after King Solomon dies, Rehoboam, his son, reigns, and he kind of lets power go to his head, and there's a rebellion, and there is a split in the kingdom of Israel, and they split for the northern 10 tribes. Okay, the kingdom of Israel, with their capital in Shechem and eventually Samaria, because Jerusalem, which is kind of smack dab in the middle of the whole country, is more associated with the southern kingdom and the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Okay, these each will have their own kings, and they eventually they have a very divided stance even in religious things. The southern kingdom keeps everything at Jerusalem, the priesthood and all of that. The northern kingdom, particularly Jeroboam the first, not the Jeroboam that we're dealing with here, but Jeroboam the first, set up their own centers of worship. One at Dan, which is the way, way northern part of the land of Israel, and the other at Bethel. And that was the place where the northern kingdom was meant to go, because you didn't want to cross the line and go to the southern capital of Jerusalem to worship. Of course, that doesn't make God very happy. He doesn't like this division. He had set everything up at Jerusalem, but this is the state of things as it's going on. So as we look at this, let's go to 1 Kings 12. Let me pull that up, because that's going to give us the information here of what Jeroboam the first did. Okay, this is the divide of the kingdoms is 900 BC, 930 BC, and Hosea is writing about 800 BC. So there's about 125 years between the split of the northern and southern kingdom and when Hosea is writing. So this is what Jeroboam the first did after he sort of had a time of prosperity. Okay, so this is 1 Kings chapter 12, beginning at verse 25. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, that is northern kingdom, and lived there. And he went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David. Now he's talking about southern kingdom because David was from the tribe of Judah, right? And Judah is the southern kingdom. So he's worried that his people are going to defect, okay? Verse 27, if this people go up to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem, the heart of this people will turn again to their Lord and to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. Rehoboam, despite being kind of a lout, is the Davidic king. The line does go through him, so it's kind of important that he remain king. Jeroboam is concerned that if he doesn't create a place for his people to worship and they have to cross the enemy's line and go worship Jerusalem, that they will eventually realize that Rehoboam is the true king and that they should have allegiance to him. So he's concerned about this. So he's going to set up a rival. So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. And he said to the people, you have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Now, you remember the worship of the golden calf in the book of Exodus, okay, as the people are leaving, right, and they gather around, and so Moses is up on the mountain receiving the 10 commandments. He's up there too long, and the people freak out, so they ask Aaron, his brother, to make for them a god to worship, and he creates this calf, or rather, Aaron says, we threw the gold into the fire and out came this calf. Like it was all magic. I love that part because it's hilarious. You could just see Aaron like, we threw the gold in the fire and out came this calf. And so we thought it must be something divine. So we should pray to it, you know? It's just, he's trying to convince his brother Moses, who has been up on the mountain talking face to face with God. And you just see Moses like, what? Like, you did what? And of course, he breaks the tablets of stone and out of anger, right? And then he marches up, and then the story goes on from there. But here, Jeroboam is going back to that, and he's saying, the real true God didn't bring you up out of Egypt. That God that has his temple in Jerusalem, he's not the one who did anything. Remember who really did something? The golden calves. They brought us up out of Egypt. So completely rewriting history, completely redoing the sin of the people back at Mount Sinai. Just a terrible idea from beginning to end. But this is what Jeroboam does for the people. And he set one in Bethel. Bet El means house of God. Very a nice name. So there's a lot of churches named Bethel, but here in the house of God, you have an idol, right? So we're underscoring the first commandment sin that Jeroboam is committing, and the other he put in Dan, way at the north. Then this thing became a sin, for the people went as far as Dan to be before one. So they traveled. He also made temples on high places and appointed priests from among all the people who were not one of the Levites. And again, God had expressly forbidden this all through the Old Testament. The Pentateuch, of course. You have the rebellion of the sons of Korah, the people that think they can offer their incense before God because, well, everybody should be able to be a priest, and God consumes them with fire. And then, I love this. God can have a dark sense of humor sometimes, and he does that with the 250 guys that offer incense unlawfully before him. Fire comes out from the altar or from the ark and consumes them. And then God commands Aaron to go and pick up their censers of bronze and then hammer them into a plating to cover the altar, so that every time Israel worships, they're going to see this reminder of how you do not try to take God's word and twist it for yourself. God has said only the Levites and only the sons of Aaron from the Levite clan can be priests. And if you try to go around that, this is what happens. You get consumed with fire. So there's this visual reminder of like, this is why you listen to what the Lord has said. And God makes a covering for the altar. Gotta love that. So that was very explicit. And here, Jeroboam again explicitly defies God, right? So that's what he's doing. He's really setting up a terrible example here. So he has his own temples with their own false gods, and now he's got his own priests, right? All in defiance of God. And now he's going to set up his own feasts, whereas God had his own, and he said, you should remember these, but they're going to do their own. Jeroboam appointed a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah, and he offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he had made. The dude literally made them himself, and he thinks that they're gods. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places that he had made. He went up to the altar that he had made in Bethel on the 15th day in the 8th month, in the month that he had devised from his own heart. And he instituted a feast for the people of Israel and went up to the altar to make offerings. Okay, so this is what becomes known in the scripture as the sin of Jeroboam. It's referenced multiple times in the Old Testament, recalling the people back to this terrible idolatry that Jeroboam had encouraged amongst the people. And the kings afterward continued, okay? Jeroboam II, that Hosea is dealing with, was a fairly good king. It was a time of peace and prosperity for the northern kingdom, and yet we are told that he did not undo the sin of his forefathers. So he did not get rid of the worship centers in Dan and Bethel, and we can assume the worship of the golden calf there. Even though he went around destroying altars to Baal in his reign, he didn't get rid of the worship of the golden calf in Dan and Bethel, which is kind of odd. So he tried to hedge his bets as well. So he kind of did some good things, but didn't go far enough. And so he also is complicit in the sin of Jeroboam, his ancestor. That's what I'm looking for. Okay? All right. Okay, back to Hosea. The sin of Jeroboam is idolatry, and that's the big problem that Hosea is going to be dealing with. There are multiple prophets running around. Hosea is the only one that's in his specific timeline. His time, he's the oldest, and then shortly after him, you'll have Amos, and we're also going to encounter Jonah. He is somewhat of a contemporary, so those events are kind of going on at the same time. But they're all dealing with the apostasy, that is the falling away from worship of the true God into worshiping idols. So now we have the call of Hosea. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, all right, now what does it mean that he spoke through him? Simply that Hosea was a mouthpiece for what God wanted to say. Now, does that mean that God took over Hosea and controlled him like a zombie? No. He used Hosea's own mind, his own voice, but somehow God communicated the words or the message that Hosea was to speak, the same way that God did with the other prophets in the Old Testament. Okay? God is going to have a really strange command for Hosea. And God likes to do this with his prophets. Have them do weird things so that you pay attention to them, okay? John the Baptist in the New Testament, the last of the prophets, is weird. He's out in the wilderness. He's wearing camel's hair and eating locusts and wild honey. He was just an odd dude. He was patterned after Elijah, who dressed the same way. And they say, oh, he's a new Elijah, who was also a weird dude. So God has his prophets do strange things to illustrate his point. And this in Hosea is one of the strangest. All right. So the Lord said to Hosea, go, take to yourself a wife. Oh, that's good. Hosea gets to be married. And then God continues, of whoredom, and have children of whoredom. For the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. Okay. Your text may have the word harlotry. Okay, you take yourself a woman of harlotry. What we're seeing here is throughout the Bible, God depicts his relationship with his people as a marriage. And in fact, all marriages are meant to remind us and point us to the faithfulness of God. And our marriages will always be imperfect. However, God's faithfulness to us never wavers and never wanes. Okay, so what we have here is a dim picture of the heavenly reality. Okay, as in many things. God continually talks about being a husband to his bride, the people, or the people of Israel. God does this in the Old Testament and in the New. All right. So when Israel worships another god, like the golden calves or like Baal or Asherah or whatever, it is as if they are having an extramarital affair. And TVMA, wherever that thing button is. In the Canaanite religions, that often involved sexual licentiousness. Put it that way. Temple prostitution and orgies and feasting were all common to the worship of the Canaanite gods around this time. And so there is a sexual element to this in a lot of cases. But even if there weren't, God still uses this extramarital affair as a metaphor for how the people were unfaithful to him. They were locked in the bonds, all right, of a covenant. God said, I will be their God and they will be my people. And the first commandment, you shall have no other gods, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, he says. So he's a jealous lover. He doesn't want you to be loving on anybody else. And so the worship of the golden calves is especially offensive. And so he's going to tell his prophet, his mouthpiece, to go and take a woman of prostitution, or at least of infidelity, whether or not she was a prostitute by trade, or God knew that she would be unfaithful in her marriage to Hosea, is unclear. But regardless of who she was before the marriage, we do know that she was unfaithful during the marriage. And that is where we get this. But I think it's probably more likely that she was an adulteress or maybe even a prostitute before Hosea marries her, because I think God's whole point is for people to go, why is Hosea marrying this woman? Why is this mouthpiece of God, this holy man, marrying this sort of woman? And it was all meant for show and to underscore that the people had been unfaithful in their covenant with God above. Okay, so that's what Hosea is called to do. And to his credit, man, Hosea does it. That's wild. Okay, so Hosea actually says, okay. So notice here that God also says, for the land commits great whoredom. The promised land was a living, breathing player in the history of Israel, and it often summarized the people who lived on it. God had said at the very beginning, if they keep his commandments, the land will provide for them and cause them to grow. However, if they do not keep his commandments, the land will vomit them out, become their enemy. And so now he's saying that this land is in error and it's going to be a problem. So, verse 3, so he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim. We don't know anything about either of them, as far as I can tell. And she conceived and bore him a son. Okay, so this is a real marriage, okay? And they're blessed with a son. And that would be cause for rejoicing in any Hebrew family, any family, right? And now comes the naming. And there's so much that's involved in a name in the Old Testament. Moses asks for God's name to prove that he spoke to the God of Israel and that he had authority to command Pharaoh to let him go. And God gives him his personal name, that I am, or Yahweh. It was believed that if you had someone's name, you had power over them, which is one of the reasons why Jacob asks for God's name when he wrestles with God. Jesus refused to give it to him. Also, we see the changing of names. God changes Abram to Abraham as he becomes the father of a multitude of nations. That ending, that M on the end, is usually how Hebrew makes plural. So he becomes a father of a multitude of nations. Sarai becomes Sarah, right? You have Israel or Jacob becoming Israel, the personification of Israel, for he has striven with God and won, right? Isaac, he laughs because Sarah laughed when she heard that she would give birth to him. So God wanted to remind her of that. So there's much more in a name, and Jesus's name is important. It literally means Yahweh saves. Christ is this anointed one. So Jesus Christ means this anointed one is the one by whom God will save you, is essentially what Jesus Christ means. So a name is much more than just the way that you're known to your friends. So a name is very important, especially for the Hebrew people. And the Lord said to him, this is verse 4, call his name Jezreel, for in just a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. God here declares that he is going to end the kingly line of Jehu, of which Jeroboam II, the king of Israel at this current time, is a descendant. So here Hosea prophesies the end not only of the current king of Israel, but of his entire family dynasty, all because of the blood of Jezreel. And we'll talk about what that was in a second. Verse 5, and on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. Something bad happened in Jezreel, and it had to do with Jeroboam's ancestor, Jehu. Okay? All right. Jehu was a pretty faithful guy. He was a commander in the army who then rose to power. He seized the throne for himself by killing Ahab. Okay, now, Ahab was an awful king. You remember Ahab and Jezebel, okay? Naboth's vineyard. Ahab wants this vineyard. Naboth owns it. Ahab says, let me buy it from you. Naboth says, well, I can't sell it. It's my family land. I'm sorry, king, but it belongs to my family. That was something that God had decreed. That wasn't just Naboth's choice. God said the land must remain in the family. So he's being faithful. Ahab goes home pouty. Jezebel's like, what's wrong with you? And he says, well, Naboth won't sell me his vineyard. And Jezebel goes, aren't you the king? Can't you do what you want? And, I'll take care of this. So she sets this thing up where she hires two worthless men, it says, and they accuse Naboth of blasphemy. They put him on trial. They stone him to death. And then once he's dead, then Ahab appropriates his land and he gets his vineyard. Okay. Jezebel orchestrated this, but Ahab went along with it. They were awful, right? Okay. So Jehu, when he comes to power, he goes and he avenges Naboth and others according to the prophecy of Elijah that said that this is what was going to happen. Ahab would be overthrown. So Jehu is doing the Lord's work in ending Ahab's reign. But what happened in the valley of Jezreel? Well, to look at that, we need to go to 2 Kings chapter 10. So let's jump to 2 Kings chapter 10. Now Ahab, okay, the king at that time, had 70 sons in Samaria. Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria, to the rulers of the city, to the elders, and to the guardians of the sons of Ahab. So these were underage guys, okay? They had guardians, they had caretakers. saying, "Now then, as soon as this letter comes to you, seeing your master's sons are with you, and they are with you chariots and horses, fortified cities and weapons, select the best and fittest of your master's son, and set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house." Jehu says, I want to have a contest to see who should be king. Ahab's son, whichever one you think is the best, and me. Trial by combat, But they were exceedingly afraid and said, "Behold, the two kings could not stand before him. How then can we stand?" So he who was over the palace and he who was over the city, together with the elders and the guardians, sent to Jehu, saying, "We are your servants, and we will do all that you tell us. We will not make anyone king. Do whatever is good in your eyes." These people loyal to Ahab and Jezebel recognize that this is not good. It's a bad idea. And so they swear fealty to Jehu. They put forth terms of peace. All right. Then he, that's Jehu, wrote to them a second time saying, "If you are on my side, and if you are ready to obey me, so if I am your king, take the heads of your master's sons and come to meet me at Jezreel tomorrow at this time." Now the king's sons, 70 persons, were with the great men of the city who were bringing them up. And as soon as the letter came to them, they took the king's sons and slaughtered them, 70 persons, and put their heads in baskets and sent them to him at Jezreel. So even though they were saying like, "Hey, we want to be peaceful, we're not going to stand against you," Jehu comes back and says, "Well, if that's the case, I want you to kill anybody belonging to Ahab, so none of his descendants can ever challenge me for the throne." The sin of Jehu here seems to be what we might call overkill. So yes, although God did want Jehu to end Ahab's miserable reign, okay, it is unclear if that meant killing Ahab's entire family, especially after they say, "Listen, these kids are all underage, right? There's not going to be anybody to stand against you. We swear fealty to you." He still has them murdered. Okay. That seems to be what the blood of Jehu to be avenged in the valley of Jezreel is applying to. It's not that Jehu didn't do the Lord's bidding in deposing Ahab. It's that he seemed to have gone too far with his bloodlust. Okay. We're going to see more of this here in a second. Verse 8, when the messenger came and told him, "They have brought the heads of the king's sons," he said, "Lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until the morning." Well, that's nice. Then in the morning, when he went out, he stood and said to all the people, "You are innocent. It is I who conspired against my master and killed him." So he owns up to deposing Ahab. He's talking to the people, saying that I'm not going to kill everyone here. All right. But then he goes, "Who struck down all of these?" He's saying, how did these heads get there? "Know then that there shall fall to the earth nothing of the word of the Lord, which the Lord spoke concerning the house of Ahab, for the Lord has done what he said by his servant Elijah." Jehu claims that he has fulfilled the prophecy of Elijah and that multiple people across the land are in agreement with him. That's why they killed Ahab's sons and sent their heads. So Jehu is kind of doing a power play here by saying, "Listen, I did something bad that I rose up against my king, but it needed to be done, and I'm not alone. Look at the people who are in support of me who ended his bloodline." That's what Jehu's doing here. Now, part of that was what God wanted him to do and sent him to do, but it seems he's gone too far. And if he hasn't already, he will in a second, okay? Jehu struck down all who remained of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, all his great men, all his close friends, all his priests, until he left him none remaining. Anybody connected to the house of Ahab, not even by blood, is executed. Okay? If that weren't enough, it continues. Then he set out and went to Samaria. On the way, when he was at Beth-eked of the shepherds, Jehu met the relatives of Ahaziah, king of Judah, and he said, "Who are you?" And they answered, "We are relatives of Ahaziah, and we came down to visit the royal princes and the sons of the queen mother." He said, "Take them alive," because they're going to see Jezebel. And he took them alive and slaughtered them at the pit of Beth Eked, 42 persons, and he spared none of them. Okay, just random people that were going to visit a relative. Like, this just doesn't make any sense. Then he goes on to strike down the prophets of Baal. Okay, that's fine, I guess. And then he rules in Israel. So we see him branching out from ending Ahab and Jezebel to ending Ahab's family, to ending everybody connected with Ahab's family, to then ending anybody loosely associated with Ahab's family. He's murdering hundreds of people, at least. So that seems to me to be what the sin of Jehu in the Valley of Jezreel is. The Valley of Jezreel is a geographic place, kind of up in northern kingdom a little bit. But some of this happened there, but also it's the scheme is contrived there. And so it becomes like a shorthand for everything that Jehu did to the house of Ahab, which part of it was commanded by God, but it definitely seems like he went too far. Okay? So, on that day, I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel, because I will punish the house of Jehu, of which Jeroboam II is a descendant, for the blood of Jezreel. He went too far. And so I'm going to end this bloodline like he ended the bloodline of Ahab. Okay? So God's pretty angry. And so the kid named Jezreel is going to bear the message of that anger everywhere he goes. Why did he name Jezreel? Oh, because God told Hosea that he's going to punish all the descendants of Jehu for what Jehu did at Jezreel and the bloodshed that he had there. Oh, that's pretty serious. Of Hosea's children, Jezreel gets the best name. Just spoiler alert, he's going to get the best one. All right, verse 6. She, that is Gomer, conceived again and bore a daughter. And the Lord said to him, "Call her name No Mercy, for I will have no mercy on the house of Israel to forgive them at all." That is some frightening words to hear from the God of forgiveness. I've had it. I'm fed up. I'm not going to have mercy on them anymore. But here's the thing about our God. Even when he is full of righteous anger and wrath, even when he swears no more mercy, his mercy still gets the better of him. He always saves a remnant. He decides to flood the entire world. I'm going to save Noah. He decides to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm going to save Lot and his family. Every time he decides that he's going to end everything, he spares a remnant. And he does that with Israel when they go off into captivity and numerous other places in the text. Okay? So that's what he says. I've had it, no more mercy. And then the very next verse, verse 7, but I will have mercy on the house of Judah. Judah was a little bit more faithful, but not that much better most of the time. The two tribes in the south. And yet there we see Benjamin, which was the tribe of Saul, King Saul, and Judah, the tribe of King David. And if you remember, Saul's son Jonathan and David were very close, and they were friends forever. And so we see even in the divide of the kingdoms, the southern kingdom, Benjamin and Judah are remaining together. David and Jonathan are still friends in that way. They were a little bit more faithful, but not by much. They had their own problems, okay? But God says, I will have mercy on them. I'm not going to wipe out all of my people, but I'm going to save the most faithful. And he promised that through the line of David, the Messiah, the Savior, would come to his people. And so if he's going to uphold that promise, he can't get rid of the tribe of David. And David made an oath and a pact with Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, Jonathan. And so God honors that even in this situation. I will save them. How? By the Lord their God. Now that probably meant, I, the Lord their God, will do something. But when God says, I will save them by the Lord their God, I'm thinking Jesus. He's not saying I'm going to save them by a deliverer. I'm going to save them by a good king. I'm going to save them by a miracle. He says, nope, I'm going to save them by myself. I myself will come down and save them. The Lord their God will save them. And that's exactly what Jesus does. So it's neat here to see this messianic promise right here in the book of Hosea. All right. I will save them by the Lord their God. I will not save them by bow or by sword or by war or by horses or by horsemen. I will save them by the Lord their God. Jesus doesn't use any of those things. He comes in complete humility into Jerusalem, and there he suffers and dies like a common criminal, weak, powerless, having nothing. And yet that is how he saves his people, as his name says. That is how Yahweh saves his people. Okay? So right here, you have this wonderful prophecy of Jesus' death on the cross, right here in Hosea chapter 1. When she had weaned no mercy, she conceived and bore a son. Okay, now what are we going to name this one? And the Lord said, call his name Not My People, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. That's rough to hear, because all through the Old Testament, God is continually reiterating his covenants and saying, I will be their God and they will be my people. He says that over and over again. And now he's saying, I've had enough. I'm not their God anymore, and they are not my people. Interesting in the rabbinic literature, so not the Bible, but in the rabbinic literature, they have an account. I'm not going to say it actually happened, but they talk about how this oral tradition came down of Hosea replying to God, saying, well, if they're not your people, why don't you pick another? Like, just pick someone else. You're God, you can do what you want, just pick another. That's not in the Bible here, and so I don't know if it really happened, but it's kind of interesting to think, well, if you don't like these people, pick another. Well, what would happen if he picked another? Guess what? They would do the same thing, because all people are the same. They're just the same, right? So call this one Not My People. You are not my people, and I am not your God. And he just ends it there. But look at the very next verse. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea. That was what he promised Abraham. They would be like the sand on the seashore, that the stars in the sky, he would be their God and they would be his people. So right after he says, they're not my people, he reiterates the promise by which he said, they are my people and there'll be a lot of them. Again, God's mercy always gets the better of him. And that's a good thing. I also love that if you jump to the very end of the Bible, the very, very end, Revelation chapter 21, Jesus reiterates this one last time. John writes, and I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will save them by the Lord his God, right? He will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. A reiteration of all the covenants of the Old Testament, and also pretty much almost a direct reference to Hosea chapter 1 here in Revelation chapter 21. Interesting to see those things connected, right? I will be with them. I will dwell with them. That's how he will save them. And I will be their God and they will be my people. Okay? So God walks this back even in the end of Revelation. Verse 10, we just read this, but let's read it again. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And in the place where it is said to them, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, children of the living God. God here seems to be operating almost schizophrenically, right? He's angry, you're not my people, but then he's like, oh, you're my children. How does that work? Well, God is expressing his wrath over their sin, his displeasure over their idolatry. Yet he also remembers that he must be true to his promises, because the Lord God is true. He cannot lie. What he says is true and is done. So he has said that he will save them. He has said that they are his children. So even while he threatens to walk that back and deny that, he can't deny himself. Even when we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. We just had that reading in our scripture if you follow the 3-year lectionary series. So God's mercy always gets the better of him. And I think that should be like our remember point, right? Right here. Let's see if I can do this on the fly, huh? Properties. Gotta spell it right. God's grace always gets the better of him. Okay. Oh, and it didn't appear. Come on. I have no idea why. Here I thought it was going to work. Oh, there we go. Oh, it's way large. You're like, okay, Eric, can we just, It's so large. Why is it so big? I don't know if you can even see this on your screen. All right, here we go. Finally. Yeah, that's about the right size. All right. Hopefully you can see that. Things to remember. Number 1, God's grace always gets the better of him. All right. We see that all through Hosea and also all through the scriptures. And thanks be to God for that, because if it weren't for that, we would be lost, right? If God actually meant, you are not my people, I will not forgive you, we would be lost. But he remembers his promises, and he remembers what he has said, and he is true even when he doesn't need to be, when he has every reason not to be. If we are faithless, if we don't uphold our end of the covenant, he still upholds his, because he is faithful and he cannot deny himself. All right, back to our text. You are not my people. So in that place where they're told that you're not my people, immediately you have children of the living God. And I love living God there. He's making a comment here about the dead gods of Baal and the golden calves. Again, they are made with hands. They do not have life. They're just material objects, right? But he is a living God, and he means very much bodily, right? Because he's talking about Jesus. That is how we will know the living God, by the living God who walks among the living, right? So here again is a prophecy about Jesus. You are not my people. It should also be said to them, children of Jesus, basically. Verse 11, and the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together. Notice here that he will save the northern kingdom as well. Might be just a remnant, but they're included here. He's not going to wipe them completely out. So he says, once again, all my people will be united and brought together, and they shall appoint for themselves one head. So they're going to have one king again. It's not going to be a divided kingdom. Well, gee, who is that king? And they shall go up from the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Okay, so after the shedding of blood, there comes redemption. All right, fine. Okay, but wait a minute. Who's going to be this one king? Well, to that, you have to go to John chapter 10. Famous words. I am the good shepherd. It's Jesus. I know my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. And look here. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. Jesus is that one king who will unite all of God's people. And there, Israel and Judah are representative of everybody, not just the descendants of those tribes. We're talking about everybody. For this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me. I lay it down on my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father. So Jesus himself, the Lord himself, will be their redemption. That is how they will be saved, right? I will save them by the Lord their God, their one King, Jesus Christ, who's King over all. So that is the beginning of Hosea. We're going to see some similar themes run through everything. But remember, these are oracles, individual prophecies that come to Hosea, and he deals with them. Here's the one where he has his prostitute wife, has children, gives them unique names so that they'd be walking, talking reminders of God's warning and God's judgment. But also we see here in Hosea God's mercy and grace that get the better of him, even when he's really, 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 really upset, and upset for good reason. So hopefully that gives you an insight into the character of your God and your Savior. Thank you for studying along with me. God willing, I'll see you back next week for chapter 2. Don't forget to follow our channel to get the notifications right when those get posted. God's blessings to you, and take care.